Good morning. My name is Jennifer Muhammad, and I work with Fair Chance DC, managing Alumni Network Services. On behalf of our entire team at Fair Chance, we thank you for sharing your morning with us. We realize that your time is valuable, particularly in this time when many of the youth and families that we serve, not to mention our staffs, our own families, are being affected by COVID-19. Our topic of discussion this morning is HR for nonprofits, staffing success in the time of coronavirus. I see that as you're entering, you are telling us your name and the name of your organization, and we'd like to welcome you, and we are happy that you're here, and we're happy that everyone else can see. Good morning. We see the Dance Institute of Washington is here. Exodus Treatment Center is here. We have a roll call, and we're just so pleased that you could join us this morning. We see Judy Smith of Pizzazz, the Jones of Dolls and Dreams, Inc. We're so happy to have you with us this morning. We see that June Crenshaw is with us from the Wanda Alston Foundation. And please continue to let us know who's in the house as you enter today, and so that your peers can see as well. Next slide. So I'm going to take a moment this morning to review our agenda and also to review our learning objectives. They're all kind of put together. Of course, we are going to do a temperature check, and we are going to have opening remarks from our Fair Chance leadership. We will then get a chance to hear from some executive directors and how COVID-19 has impacted their organization. We will then focus in on contingency planning. Additionally, we will look at some of the human resources, tools, strategies that we can all share and take with us after we leave today. So at this time, at Fair Chance, we have a team of wonderfully qualified and experienced staff who work together to support the nonprofit organizations that we serve. I'm happy to introduce our tech support for this morning, Salome Odera, who is the Communications and External Relations Manager at Fair Chance. Salome?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before I get started, I just want to check, can you hear and see me? If so, please raise your hand using the raise hand button at the bottom of your window. Okay, I see the hands getting raised.
I see them.
Good, good, good. Wonderful. I'll give everyone a few more minutes. Again, if you can hear and see me, please raise your hand. Good, good. I think that's a good group of people. If you can't hear or see me, or you're having any tech issues during the presentation, please use the chat box and send a message to all panelists. That will let me know to follow up with you privately. If you have any questions during the webinar for our host, please type your question in the chat box and set your question to all panelists and attendees. And we'll have points during the presentation where we'll answer your questions. And finally, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will only be shared with today's attendees. Any confidential information shared will remain with this group. Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you, Salome. Thank you so much. So our hope this morning is to set up a virtual conference room of sorts, a peer sounding board, an executive director learning community that allows us to share resources and experiences with one another. With that in mind, please use your chat box feature to respond to the following question. What are you doing as a nonprofit leader to take care of yourself and stay sane amidst COVID-19 crisis? We realize that leaders must take care of themselves in order for their organization to have sustainability. And so I'm going to take a moment to let you type your responses in the chat box. Some leaders, and you can type now, some leaders have said that they have tapped into free DJ jams on Instagram, there's been free Alvin Ailey dance classes. Some people, some leaders exercise, walking to work is are some of the tools and some of the ways. I see fitting in noon walks and daily yoga. Gosh, that's wonderful. Um, yes, you definitely do need that. Some people have talked about Netflix series that they have tapped into as a way to kind of, kind of relax their minds. I see that therapy has been listed, which is really helping with mental health, because mental and emotional health must be stabilized. I see that some of you are gardening during this time and have some great music and fresh air. Also books. Books are great to read. And then also, this great platform, Zoom, allows us to connect with not just with meetings for work, but with family and friends. Some people have talked about international cooking nights. They enjoy being home. Since they're home, they're cooking. Someone says they're a yoga instructor and have been meditating for over 40 years. Wow, that is wonderful. And then there's also the challenges of having young children at home, but daytime gardening breaks help out with the balance and create science. And then the beautiful weather, taking advantage of that. Lots of prayer, music, exercise. Oh, wow. Somebody said TikTok videos. I tell you, TikTok saves the day. I tell you, if you can just take a break. And somebody said they got a new puppy. I was thinking about that myself. So in regards to how to support not just yourself, but it says that we're having grief and loss sessions every Tuesday for our staff and leaders online, because the reality, unfortunately, is that this crisis impacts more and more people that we know, people that are in our networks. And so it's just, in order to balance and stabilize these kinds of collective mindfulness and focusing activities are just really important. And so I'd like to encourage you to keep sharing your responses so that we can add more to our toolkit. Next slide. So I am happy to introduce Fair Chance's Chief Executive Officer, who has worked to support, advocate for, and help build the capacity of nonprofits at Fair Chance since 2013. Please join me in welcoming Gretchen Vanderveer. Gretchen.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. You might see the background of spring grass behind me. One of my survival strategies has been to pick a different fun background of every day as a way of sort of having some fun in the midst of spending 8 to 10 hours in my little office by myself, trying not to disturb the rest of my family. But it is in also a room where I have a printer. And so my kids who are schooling will sometimes come back and forth, and the grass hides them appropriately from my meetings when they come and get things off the printer. Anyway, I just want to thank you for being with us, and wanted to maybe share an analogy or metaphor that someone shared with me that I thought fitly described what we're experiencing. And the metaphor was people who are seasick. They really struggle, but when somebody tells them to come up from below decks, or if they're in the car and they're in the back seat of the car, to get in the front of the car where they can see forward, or to come up from below decks where they can see the horizon, that seeing the horizon immediately brings some sense of relief to them. And I think part of what is so difficult in this particular situation that we all are experiencing is that we do not know what the horizon will bring, and we can't even see it in front of us. So we are all sort of living with this, and we need to appropriately acknowledge that it's a struggle. And all of us are experiencing this in different ways and with different challenges, but all of us are affected. And we will get through this, we will, but the only way we will do it is by being together, coming together, sharing our stories, sharing our strategies, and learning from one another. And so that's what we're here to do this morning. And Jennifer very nicely laid out our agenda. But I do want to highlight that because we don't see the horizon, we do not know when we'll be able to go back to some semblance of work as normal, when we'll be able to host special events, when we'll be able to count on donors and the District of Columbia government funding, and all of those things that we are now sort of trying to reckon with. Contingency planning is at least something we can do that gives us some semblance of control. So I'm very excited that we are going to have a case study to share with you today of one organization that is doing contingency planning. I'm also very excited today to welcome Jennifer Mohammed to the Fair Chance family. We have dreamed and had a vision of having somebody on our team whose specific assignment was to think about how to support our network. And Jennifer has come on board as our Alumni Network Services Advisor, and she is going to be somebody I hope you all will get to know and will hear from often. And we are still building out our strategy to that effect. And quite frankly, this webinar is part of our attempt to build out that strategy. We are going to take the opportunity sometime during this session to get from you how you think Fair Chance can best support you during this time. We are already responding, as are you, but we want to learn more. So we look forward to hearing from you throughout the course of this webinar. Mostly at the end, I think, is when we've planned that time specifically, and I know some of you can't stay on, so email us. Anyway, with that, I want to turn it back to Jennifer to introduce the next part of our program. But if you would just use your chat feature and say, "Welcome, Jennifer. We are all so excited you're here."
Great. Thank you so much, Gretchen. I'm excited to do the work, and I'm glad to be here. At this time, we get a chance to hear from those of your peers. I'm happy to introduce two Fair Chance alumni to share how COVID-19 has affected their organizations. From the budgets to staffing to programming, we are here to hear how they have been able to shift and pivot in the midst of this uncertainty. So we're glad to have Yasmin Arrington from Scholarships and also Lamont Brown from the Swaliga Foundation. So if I can please ask to hear from you all at this time. Actually, we'll hear from Yasmin first. Yasmin, are you there? Okay. As we're getting Yasmin's audio, I wanted to say that Scholarships provides college scholarships, mentoring, and a peer support network to children of incarcerated parents. And so that is, I saw Yasmin sign on, so I know that she is on. So we're just working to get her audio on. While we wait to do that, I'd like to let you know that Lamont Brown is from the Swaliga Foundation, and he is working with youth, building future leaders through STEAM education and entertainment. Lamont, are you there? Can you come enable your audio?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Welcome. Please talk to us about how COVID-19 has impacted your organization.
Yes, well, first, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Just sending love and light to everybody that's listening to this right now. This is it's an interesting time in a lot of ways. I think everybody has been affected, particularly in the youth development sector, in some critical ways, with all of the schools shutting down, and even the out of school time activities being affected the way that they have. That's pretty much where our organization, the Swaliga Foundation, gets most of its learners. That's how we are actually able to impact our community. So a little bit of background about Swaliga. We use the arts to teach STEM, science, tech, engineering, and math. So we provide after school activities. We also do free community events to engage families. And we have an exchange program where we take some of our students from the DC metro area out of the country. Last year, we went to South Africa. So these programs are really our way of connecting with our students. And while, we do have some online things already up and running, that has been the primary way that we're able to connect with youth and families. So that's been the biggest adjustment. Not being able to, have these after school classes, not being able to have community events where we can engage our families. We've had to really just pivot. And we're, figuring this thing out as we go, like most people are. One of the things that we've been able to do is go online on live. So on Instagram and Facebook, I've been going live every single day. Today's no different. And we're just doing free STEAM activities, free lessons, encouraging our youth and families to tune in. And I think that's been one of the most important things for us, is wanting to be a resource during this time. I know we've been challenged financially, as an organization. I have to think about the financial health of our organization as well. And it's been quite difficult. A lot of our contracts and workshops that were already booked had to be canceled, quite frankly. So now, our focus has just shifted to maintaining our impact. If we're able to still be a resource and provide STEAM education, tools, and activities, then we're fulfilling our mission. And my thinking is that as long as we're staying focused on fulfilling our mission and supporting our youth, then the organization will be able to sustain itself during this time. So that's been one of the biggest changes. It's definitely been difficult. We've been looking at other ways to generate revenue during this time. One of our biggest things is STEAM education content and entertainment. So I'm encouraging organizations and leaders to just be creative as possible during this time. We had to really just take a step back and look at our program offerings, look at the things that we do well, and of course, see how we can digitize them. A lot of things are moving online right now. You're seeing more Zoom calls, you're seeing more activity on social media. So we've been doing that as well. But on the flip side, it's been developing new STEAM content. That includes music, that includes videos, that includes things that will be a resource, and some things that will be able to generate revenue for the organization. And then, of course, just looking into as many different grants and funding support that is available. There's a lot of funding and even more coming out every day to support nonprofits and small businesses. Aside from the federal funding that's out there, each state or locality has a contingency plan in place to support businesses. I know District of Columbia has one as well, and we just applied for one through Verizon. They're doing it in cycles where they have stimulus support for nonprofits and small businesses. So yeah, I think that answers your question. Aside from that, it's really just been trying to find peace and stay sane during this time. And everyone does that differently. For me, I love just making sure that I'm keeping my mental, my environment very peaceful. I do that through music, playing some songs that I like, starting the morning with peaceful music. I always like to at least step outside and get some fresh air just to start the day, and meditate. I think that's super important right now, because even as everybody is sitting still or in the same place for the most part, our minds can still be wandering and busy and, stressed, just thinking about all the things that are going on or lack thereof. So that's been one of my personal goals, is to just kind of be still for a second, be calm. And, that always benefits in the long run. Like if you're able to do that self-care, that makes the work that we do so much more impactful. So those are some of the ways that we have been affected at the Swaliga Foundation.
So thank you so much for sharing.
Hello?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
we can hear you, Yasmin.
Okay, is there
Please,
feedback or is it clear?
it's clear. There's
Okay,
not
my
feedback.
apologies for that. My name is Yasmin Arrington. I'm the founder and executive director of Scholar CHIPS. The CHIPS stands for Children of Incarcerated Parents. Uh, you know, naturally, COVID-19 has tremendously affected scholarships and our scholars. Fortunately, we're still able to continue our operations during this time, but it definitely has put a tremendous amount of pressure, financial strain, and uncertainty on the organization, as well as our scholars and their families. So we work with and we provide services for children who have incarcerated parents. And so you can already, just based on me saying that, imagine that our scholars, without any pandemic or some type of emergency, are already dealing with a lot of financial strain and insecurities and uncertainties. Now, they're all from DC, Maryland, and Virginia, but they attend colleges and universities across the country. As you know, the majority of colleges and universities in the United States, they took immediate measures. They shut down their physical campuses, which meant that I think some of them gave the students one of two options. Either they could stay in their campus housing and sort of self-quarantine, or they just had to pick up and immediately leave and come back home. So the vast majority of our scholars are back home. We have a smaller population right now where we have 35 active scholars, and the majority of them are home. They're with their families, but several of them had on-campus jobs that, because the campuses are closed, they no longer have those jobs, but that leads to other issues. They cannot pay their rent. Several of them were living in off-campus housing, and so they still have those financial obligations. That may change based on, whatever like federal policies are made regarding rent freeze and so on. But anyway, in terms of like how we've had to pivot our programming and what we're doing now, just like Lamont has shared, Scholar CHIPS has also switched over to virtual programming. This year, Scholar CHIPS is in the midst of launching our one-on-one mentoring pilot, because previously we were just providing our scholars with renewable scholarships, book awards, and occasional mentoring programming, which we were doing in person. Like we have an annual award ceremony that happens in the summer, and an annual life skills college conference that happens in November, and a scholars retreat in December. Things like that. So we were in the midst of, or we were preparing to train our mentors, and we were going to do that in person. But because of COVID-19, I don't want to put anyone at risk. And, I was not going to do that even early on. So we switched over to virtual training, or a virtual orientation, which we did via Zoom. So we immediately purchased a Zoom subscription for a year. We've been doing webinars. We also trained our scholars via Zoom so that they would know what to expect in this mentee-mentor relationship, right? And then Constant Contact. Constant Contact is one of those tools that we have used regularly for years, but I've found that particularly a very helpful tool to update our donor base and our supporters about what's going on with the scholars. And let me tell you, surprisingly, I've seen a drastic increase in the average gift. So, instead of someone who typically gives $20 or $125, maybe they're giving $500 or $1,000. So you want to make sure, and I know that most of you do this, right? But you want to make sure that you're communicating with your donors and your supporters. And don't be afraid to pick up the phone. Like, I believe in, you know, that personal connection. You have to cultivate these relationships, because that is what's going to make a difference in times like these and in the long term, right? Make people know that they're appreciated and valued. And then lastly, we also have been applying for Greater Washington Community. So the Greater Washington Community Foundation, as some of you already know or have already applied, they have a rapid response emergency fund. And it's a very short form. It is going to be time consuming, as are any other grants. And unfortunately, during this time, can you believe that our grant writing consultant just abandoned us? So there are always going to be things, you know, challenges that arise. But as the leader of the organization, as the visionary, you have to continue to believe in what you're doing and push through. I agree with Lamont, continue to be creative. I'm willing to be a resource. I mean, I trust me, Scholarships doesn't have the kind of resources and the type of, you know, funding that a lot of other nonprofits have. But what we do have is creativity. We have a very strong donor base and people that really, really care about us and want to see us succeed. On a personal level, I'll just say this, and I promise I'll wrap up. Please, I highly advise in the best possible way, make sure that when you're like, it's important to have a brand as a nonprofit. But what has also been beneficial for me and the organization is having my own personal brand. You know, Scholarships is its own entity. And yes, I am the child of an incarcerated parent, but I'm also Yasmin Arrington. I'm also Yazzie Speaks, right? And so I've started to do things to put positive energy and encourage people in the community. You know, I post positive quotes on my Facebook and my LinkedIn and my Instagram, my Twitter. I've started to open corporate prayer calls. Not to say that that's something you would want to do, but it's just like, you know, keeping in mind that there are different ways that you can connect with people and get them to support you. Robert Richard, who is a famous actor, he does a Highway Fit on YouTube. It's free. So I do my Highway Fit in the morning. I blast my music. You know, I switch. Sometimes it's gospel, sometimes it's trap. Judge me if you want to. So yeah, that's what we're doing. So far, so good. Things are very stressful, but that doesn't take away from the work that we're doing. And one of our scholars needed a laptop, and we have some support from a local AKA chapter. They just came, they gathered their funds together, and guess what? They gave us $1,000 toward purchasing a laptop for that scholar. So there's always a way to do the things you need to do to provide the services that you're providing to your populations and demographics.
Thank you so much, Yasmin, for sharing and giving all of those examples and insight into how you all have been impacted in ways that you're shifting and pivoting to stay very relevant and to stay positive in this time. We're going to ask for the rest of you who are on the webinar today. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I want to make sure that you can hear me. We're going to ask for volunteers at this time to share brief thoughts and responses after listening to the peer share. Please type in the chat box at this time. We're just looking for 1 or 2 sentence responses to share how your organization has been impacted by COVID-19. If there's anything you want to share as to how you have pivoted or shifted during this time, I'm going to take a minute to let you type. I don't see the responses coming through yet, but I have spoken with some of you, and I know that this has impacted you, and you've had to be very creative, as we've heard this morning from our 2 executive directors. Be creative. Some of you, rely on people to come use your services, come directly to you physically, and so there's had to be a programming shift. Okay, so I think that my audio has dropped out, so I'm going to wait just a moment for my tech to make sure that I'm being heard. Okay, great. So it looks like, thank you so much. It looks like I can be heard. So please continue to share in the chat box if you'd like as to how you have been, your organization has been impacted. I do see that some of the organizations say that they are setting up Google Classrooms for their early learners, which definitely is a great replacement for in-person, managing in-person education and programming. So this is, so I see that some have said, let's see. Yeah, we've moved our intake, staff meetings and stakeholder meetings virtually, which so many have done. And one of the things that I like to hear is that people are using this time, right? This is an unexpected downtime to develop policies and procedures, to do some of the professional development work, some of the strategic planning work that seems like it's like we're always trying to fit it in, but really using this time to maybe create short-term strategic planning programs. So please continue to add into the chat box. And I would like us to go to the next slide. Upon registration for this webinar, we asked you a few questions. We asked you to share some of the key resources that you were using. We asked about what contingency planning models you were using. We asked how many has had programming that has stopped. Well, as you can see with our word cloud, Zoom is the most common platform being used, with Google Hangouts and the Google Suite being right after it. Instagram and social media, as we heard from our executive directors, is being mentioned as well. Also YouTube. Next slide. We asked some questions. Has your programming stopped? We also asked, have you pivoted to virtual programming? Only 12% of respondents reporting having stopped altogether, with an additional 23% reporting that they've stopped some programming, but not all. 73% have pivoted to providing programming virtually, and the 20% who have somewhat pivoted shared that they have either transitioned some programs, but they're still keeping others. So we see that there's a variety of ways that people are pivoting, and thank you for sharing this so that we can get an idea of the landscape collectively as to how we're moving to be sustainable and keep our programs moving. Next slide. I am happy at this time. I mentioned earlier that Fair Chance has just an awesome team. We work together to support nonprofits. And so at this time, I'm happy to introduce Kristen Barney, who is a capacity building specialist at Fair Chance. And she will be working along with Tasharna Crump, the executive director of the Youth Entrepreneur Institute, as they talk about contingency planning and also give examples of the models that have been used at this organization. Kristen?
Thank you, Jennifer. So happy to be here, and I echo everyone in saying how happy we are that you have come on board as the Alumni Services Network Services Coordinator. So we are now going to explore how contingency planning can help your organization plan for the future. Because COVID-19 is an all hands on deck situation, it may be important for your board and staff to work together in new ways. And so the worksheet that I'm going to share can help guide that collaboration. I developed the worksheet specifically for the Youth Entrepreneur Institute, or YEI, which is my current praxis partner. But I also made a generic version, which I'm sharing today, and you'll get a full copy of it after the webinar. What really brings the worksheet to life, however, is to hear firsthand from how it is working, and Tasharna Crump, Executive Director of YEI, has generously agreed to share what she and YEI are learning from the process. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the generic worksheet and then turn it over to Tasharna. So I'll ask you to please put any questions about the generic worksheet into the chat box, and Jennifer will be directing questions to Tasharna and me after Tasharna speaks. So we'll hold the generic questions until the end. Next slide, please. So of course, this worksheet is designed for virtual use, and I'm presenting only sample slides. So you'll get the full writable worksheet at the end. The process is divided into two parts. First, the board and executive director develop some scenarios for how COVID could play out over time, and then we'll select 1 to 3 scenarios to plan for. Second, the board and staff complete a SWOT exercise in about 8 organizational areas, ensuring that each SWOT addresses all of the 1 to 3 scenarios that you've prioritized. And that will be followed by creating priority action steps. Now, of course, who you involve in this process depends on your organization, its culture, and needs. So I fully expect you would tailor the process to your situation. Maybe you want your executive committee to do this work and approve it with the board, review and approve it with the board. And then you take it to, maybe it's the management team of the staff. So it all depends on your situation. And even if you've already made some programming, budgetary, or staffing decisions, the worksheet may still be useful for looking ahead to longer term planning. Next slide. So this slide lays out in more detail what's involved in the two parts. And I did not include what we would call soft activities, but they are very critical for this process. That would be things like a welcome and overview, introductions, setting ground rules, things like that. As you will hear when Tasharna speaks, with YEI, we actually added a middle step. We could call it step 1A, because there were some messages that the board wanted to share with the staff to help them feel confident and comfortable for the planning. Next slide, please. So now let's take a closer look at scenario development. And next slide. During this step, your board will agree on what factors to include in each scenario. And Tasharna will speak more about this. But what I will note is that you can include under safety or agency decisions the fact that there are major racial disparities coming out with the coronavirus statistics, and think about how that may be affecting your community and consider any program design or advocacy steps to promote equity. Next slide. This slide shows on the left how YEI set up its scenarios, and on the right are some alternatives. So as a collaborator with DC Public Schools, YEI set up its scenarios based on DCPS decisions and on YEI programming periods. And that worked for them because YEI is relatively financially stable through the end of the summer. However, an organization that maybe is struggling to make payroll sooner than that may find it more practical to build out the scenarios based on financial milestones such as pay periods. So that's shown in the gray box. Another alternative in the gray box, if you are a more secure organization, you have funding or reserves, out to 6 or 12 months, you might want to look at some other types of timelines that are drawn from or adapted from experts who have really studied the landscape and thought about the long-term implications. There's a couple of them listed here. One of them is based on, it's from the Atlantic Monthly, and it's based on interviews with epidemiologists. There's another one from a more business-oriented perspective. Next slide, please. So this is a worksheet where you can actually build out a scenario, and the factors that were identified in step 1 are shown on the left. And Tasharna is going to explain in more detail how this worksheet is used. The full worksheet PDF, which you're going to receive, also includes a slide where you can sit back and think about, after you finish all the scenarios, you can think about, you can just sit back and reflect for a minute and think about which are the scenarios that you really want to focus on. So for example, YEI developed 5 scenarios, and their SWOT process is going to focus on 3 of them. Next slide, please. So now that you have your scenarios selected to plan for, then you will begin the SWOT analysis. And next slide. So first you will refine this list based on your organization. What are the categories that you want to complete a SWOT on? And of course, I think we all know what SWOT means: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you will, if you have multiple programs, you might want to break out each program and combine some of the administrative categories together. So again, this really needs to be tailored to your organization. Next slide, please. So each area, organizational area, has one slide, so there's room for writing. Now, so you will fill this out for each area with your team. Now, it is sometimes confusing to distinguish between a strength and an opportunity, and you can think of strengths as more internal and opportunities as more external. And likewise, weaknesses are more internal and threats are more external. And Tasharna will explain also how to use the orange box at the bottom, which will give you a chance to, once you finish the SWOT for a given area, to think about, okay, how are we going to take a strength-based approach to meeting the challenges in this area? Next slide, please. So finally, you will want to create, after you have all of your SWOT areas completed, you will create an action step based on your SWOT analysis. And you'll want to be very clear in things like, what is the step? Why are we taking the step? Who will do it? What's the timeline? And what are the resources? So that is the overview of the generic template. And we will have a chance to answer any questions that come up after Tasharna speaks. Next slide, please. So now I'm excited to briefly introduce Tasharna and the YEI process. Tasharna founded YEI in 2015 with a mission to train the next generation of ethical, entrepreneurial, and environmental leaders. YEI does this by helping youth identify their natural talents, monetize their skills by starting businesses, and adopt an entrepreneurial mindset for life. And together they break the cycle of local poverty by creating a local youth-led economy. YEI has 7 board members, many of whom are entrepreneurs, artists, and youth development leaders. Tasharna is a board member herself, and she is also a member of the Mayor's Commission, Learn 24 Commission, where she chairs the Committee on Funding and Capacity Building, with emphasis on representing the needs of small community-based organizations and building racial equity. And so welcome, Tasharna. Next slide.
Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here. Hope everybody is happy and healthy. I'm gonna quickly go through our process on creating this plan. So the first one is just a overview. Next slide. So for this plan, this is the plan that we're going to be using with our staff and board. As Krista said, we previously already have done some work with our board. And this upcoming Friday, we're actually going to be working with our board and staff together, which I think is really beneficial because as executive directors, we wear like 4 hats and 4 brains. So we understand the perspective of staff. We have to understand the perspective of students, and then also understand like the operational perspective and mindset of the board. So bringing them both together during this SWOT analysis was really important to have them interact and understand the different scenarios and how it affects each level of programming and operations. This first slide you're looking at is just going over our goals for today. So we're going to start by sharing and supporting each other, getting our board and our staff to really get acclimated, understanding the goals, connecting our values and mission to the SWOT analysis, and review our resilience plan, and then do a SWOT analysis and for the 8 areas. Ooh, excuse me, as you can see, COVID-19, my child is in here dropping stuff, so sorry about that. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so then we're gonna identify some sweet spots, and then just reflect and create an action plan. Next slide. This is just Thank you. So, okay, so our agenda, this is just the agenda of how it's gonna look with our staff and our board. You can go to the next slide. So this is a kind of like an icebreaker activity, a soft activity we're going to be doing with the staff and the board just to see like how is our mission relevant in the pandemic and what our staff thinks of it, and just open up conversation. You can go to the next slide. So our resilience plan is broken up into 6 parts. One is starting positive, and then board priorities, and then we're going to go into scenarios, our 3 strategies, SWOT analysis, and then the action plan. Next slide. So starting positive, one thing that I'm very, very grateful for Fair Chance is for this resilience plan, because we are still operating programs. We were preparing before the closure what we would do if there was a closure. So we have moved all of our programming to e-learning, which was very important for us not to have any interruptions in programming, because we have about 50 students who are paid about $350 every 2 weeks to actually work for our program. So we did not want any interruptions with our students. And we also transitioned over to an intensive case management. So some of our staff who were instructors full-time are now case managers at home teleworking. We've had minimum cut to hours, which is something that we are really proud of, and we know how to adapt. So we have a really amazing team and skills for us to try to overcome this pandemic, or at least get through it. Next slide. So as Krista spoke about, we had a board retreat and really looked at, with the COVID-19, what are our board priorities going to be? And one of them had a lot to do with funding. So yes, one of the great things that came out of that was, okay, we know we have funding at least through August 30th, so that we can survive in a sense, but really thinking about new ways for us to leverage this time to not just survive, to thrive. So one of the really, really crucial things for us to look at is, like, we know that we are primarily government funded, and that we need to look at different foundations and other sources of funding. So right now is a perfect time to kind of make us do it. So really, we had an executive committee launched that's really going to be working on fundraising and looking at new ways to overcome this period and create new partnerships and new funding streams. Another board priority during this period is staff retention. As I said, we have funding committed through August 30th, but we're watching our finances very carefully and as applied for recovery funds. Other 2 board strategies are student retention and continued programming, and then student and staff safety. So we want to make sure that both our staff and our students are safe during this time period. So as I said, all of our programs have been switched over to telework, so our staff is working remotely. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is showing our first couple scenarios that we came up with, and this is showing the first couple scenarios that we came up with during our board retreat. So our first scenario is the school year time. That's April 27th through June 19th. So that is for if COVID-19 affects the school year and that we're closed from April 27th through June 19th. The second one is for summer. So if this continues to go past June 19th and continues in part or all of the summer, which we see as being likely, just the way that the moves that government is making, we are continuing to prepare and innovate to make sure our e-portal and continue case management so that we can still run a summer program, and how we would adapt that to be virtual. So for instance, our MBSYP program. The next slide. The next 2 scenarios we came up with was early fall and late fall. The reason why we decided to set separate these two was because early fall is more like at the start of next school year. So if it is closed or modified during the start of next school year, then late fall, which is our fiscal year, which is going to be another important indicator for us. What we decided to do was really focus on early fall for right now. And if it continues and we see that it's a high possibility that this goes into early fall, to go ahead and start to assess late fall. But at this time, we really are not choosing to focus on late fall. But we are looking at various funding streams for recovery funds, kind of funders, and new funders and donors, because that is probably the most scary part about this for us, is that a lot of the things that are happening now are going to affect budgets for the upcoming year. As executive directors, we're used to having grant applications come out during this time for next fiscal year and have a lot of our funding either committed or secured, and that has come to a halt. And we don't know what that's going to look like for next year. So really just making sure that we are engaging the funders that we have and looking at new funders, so that way our program can transition over next year with the same amount of support or more that we had last year. Next slide. So on this slide is showing our 3 strategies, which is secure, adapt, and innovate. Me in particular is really focused on securing additional funding to support our programs from September 1st and beyond. As I said, we have funding secured through August 30th. Our second strategy is to adapt. So I'm working hard to support our staff in adapting and making sure that they have the resources they need so that they're able to help the students in adapting and succeeding, because this is a very, very difficult time, not just for us as adults, but for these young people who have been uprooted from all of the structure that they know, all of the support that they know, and it's in our community, specifically east of the river, it is a really big deal. So we want to make sure that not only are we supporting students and we're giving them the resources, but we also have to support our staff so they can support the students, and think about work-home life balance, where a lot of our staff are mothers and parents, and they have children at home. So it's really, really important for me to be able to adapt to accommodate my staff, and for my staff to be able to adapt and understand our students. And the last one, innovate. We strive to innovate, and that's what we plan to do with this pandemic. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an overview of our SWOT analysis. Some of the questions we want to ask for strengths is like, what do we do well? What makes us strong? And then our weaknesses, those are just things like, what can we improve on and what makes us vulnerable? Another really big important one for me is threats, like what could harm YI, and do we have a blind spot? And I think that that's really important in terms of our staff and our board collaborating, because sometimes we're always thinking about our strengths and weaknesses, but it's very hard to see those blind spots. So playing out scenarios really will help us to develop and know what these threats are so we can fix problems before they happen. And the last one is opportunities. What is emerging that we can build on? How can we be a part of the solution? And for us, that's being ahead of the curve. That's making sure that our online systems, our distance learning is very engaging, that we're able to still do the hands-on activities that we would have done in the classroom. So that's the difficult part about it for us, is that we have a online system, but our organization is very hands-on. It's very is an entrepreneurship, arts, and STEM organization. So we're doing a lot of hands-on activities, and businesses like that are launched are closed, and it's a really difficult period. So we're trying to transition our students' business over to e-commerce, send out STEM kits to our students. So we're not just giving them online activities, but we're actually giving them a deliverable of things to do. So coordinating that has been difficult, but we see that as an opportunity. Just as Lamont said earlier, like that's actually an opportunity, using some of our, curriculum to develop our STEM kits and be able to help be a part of trying to eliminate some of this learning loss is an opportunity that we need to take advantage of and make sure that we are doing everything that we can from our perspective and our part. So that's one of the things that came out of opportunities for us. Next slide. Okay, so with our resilience plan, this is the organizational areas we're choosing to focus on for the SWOT analysis. The main ones that are of most importance to us are programming, operations, safety, and fundraising, but we are looking at all 7 areas, and then we also have another box for other for anything else that comes up during that SWOT analysis. Next slide, please. So again, with the SWOT instructions, we're working as a team, board and staff are working together to identify the strengths, weaknesses for these 4 to 8 areas. And on the SWOT analysis, we're looking at 3 scenarios: if DCPS is closed for all or part of the school year, if it's closure through the summer, and then if it's going to affect our early fall OST programs. Next slide. Okay, so on the next couple slides, you're going to see that these are all the same for the different organizational areas. So this one in particular is for programming, and it's just the questions from the SWOT, and it's for school year, summer, early fall. So when we are brainstorming as a group, we're going to look at, what do we do well, what makes us strong, how that it can affect the school year, how that it can affect summer, and how that can affect early fall. And then on the right to the screen, you see each of those scenario dates with YIS preparation, or what it looks like so far. At the bottom in the orange box, you'll see the sweet spot for programming. Those are basically strengths, weaknesses, and things that we need to overcome overall, like where are we at, what is gonna work for us. The next slide, please. So again, this is the same thing for operations. So this will focus on our board really looking at, hey, answering these questions and then chiming in with staff for the staff to be able to understand this. And you can go on to the next slide. The next couple of slides are the same things for different operational areas. So safety, fundraising, next slide. Governance, facilities, next slide. The next part of this activity is the priority action steps, and the next 2 pages is going over program operations, those different operational areas. So after we do the SWOT analysis, we take some time to actually go through, okay, what are our action steps? We've learned what our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. What are the actions that we're going to take if this goes through the school year? What are the actions that we're going to take related to operations if this goes through summer? And if this goes through early fall, how does our operations look? Where have we enhanced funding streams to be able to continue to operate during early fall, because as of right now, we have funding through August 30th. So what are we going to do with fundraising to make sure that if this goes through early fall, that we have money to pay staff, that we have money to program, that our operations and what systems are going to be in place. So that's our action steps. Next slide. This again is for the same, the other 4 areas for the action steps. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, so a recap from the worksheet is just sharing, our board's clear path to reassure our staff. So we're really starting positive, showing our board priorities, showing the 4 scenarios and then the 3 strategies we came up with. doing a SWOT analysis on 4 to 8 areas, a reflection, priority action steps, and then we're doing like a takeaway evaluation and final words. So to get feedback from our staff, like, what do you take away from this? Because one of the really important things that we want to do during this SWOT analysis with staff and the board together is reassure our staff that they still have their positions, that we're not going to cut them next month if this continues, that they're not going to have to go get unemployment, or even for our 1099s, which is even more difficult. You know, they don't have those type of options. So really just reassure them, here's our plan. Here is how you're a part of that plan and what we need from you. And with what you're doing is going to help support our students. And this is like a circle. So just circling back on that to provide reassurances, and also to get some knowledge from our staff and our board and work together to really create a clear plan that we can then articulate to funders, you know, and reassure our funders that, hey, I know that this is challenging. Hey, we can still meet these deliverables. It may look a little different, but we are still qualified to meet these deliverables. So still provide us with the funding so we still can provide the support to our students, because one of the scariest things for me is we can't stop supporting these young people. We have to find creative ways to continue to engage them, because this is a particularly even more part of a period because they are not engaged completely in school. You know, you're moving kids who struggled when they had teachers to having to do the stuff at home, or where are they going to find the motivation in that? So it's really, really up to us to kind of still structure stuff in ways that keeps them motivated, but also keeps them engaged. And that is our mission, to try to find more engaging ways. So in my downtime, that's what I'm doing. Like, do we want to do YouTube videos? Do we want to send home, like we're thinking about, hey, for SEL, let's do some cooking videos, but then let's actually send them home with, you know, kits of food and have them cook for their family. So not only is it providing them food, it's giving them an action to do something that's still related to, you know, what we need to do. And then I have to look at, do we have the budget to support that? So it's like a big circle in terms of ideas and being creative, but working together with the staff and the board to do that. Next slide, please. So again, how this process has or will help me, I kind of started going over that. I think one of the most important things that this process has done is help me mentally to be prepared in ahead of things. So a lot of the times as executive directives, we're reactionary, and I don't want to be reactionary because I can't think that way. So being able to come up with a plan before things happen has been really helpful. And a lot of the times I've done that in the past, but as EDs, we have all of these plans in our head. And then it becomes really stressful when you tell one person, then you have to tell somebody else, and then you have to tell the next person. It's like you're just repeating the same things, but everything is all in your head. So for me to have it all documented and to have it be a collaborative experience with staff and the board, everybody is on the same page, which makes it so much easier for me to get help from the staff and for them to understand the board's perspective. A perfect example of that is while all our staff is still working, and they were working 40 hours a week. On average, our staff is now working 30 hours a week. They had to understand, like, here's the give and take in the pool. We are going to all cut our hours by 10 hours a week to make sure that we're working throughout the school year and there's no interruption, because we don't know if one of our funders are going to pull out and say, hey, you know what, we're not doing summer programming, you're not going to get that contract, right? So for YI to be able to be fiscally responsible and be able to withstand this, we just set up some practices. So I think that this process has really strengthened our board and staff connection. It has really clarified the way that I am able to communicate with both my staff and my board without wasting time, because, you know, as EDs, we have so many things to do, so many hats to wear. Some of us are accountants, some of us are mentors, some of us are, have 16 children. So we have all of these other hats to wear. So to have to really, one, repeat information, and then two, not have any other feedback in terms of planning would be really not helpful during this period in this transition. So this has really helped me prepare communications. It's helped me involve our staff and our board together in a meaningful way in terms of planning. And I really believe that this will then help our staff do the same thing with our students and our families. And really the biggest thing is having a plan, because when you don't have a plan, young people know when you all over the place, at least teenagers, right? So with us at least having a plan in place and all being on the same page, I think that this has been really helpful. So then please let this not happen, but if this goes into the summertime, we are prepared, which I really hope does not happen, but if it does, we are prepared, and we know the deliverables and we know who is responsible for what and what we need to do to get through it. So that is my reflection on this whole process of scenario planning. And next slide, I think, is Kristen, back to you.
Yes, very quickly. I love the way you talked about closing loops, Tasharna. And so also very generously, Dance Institute of Washington has agreed to just have their, the way they're communicating their emergency response plan. There's a link at the bottom of the slide where you can see how they're doing it. And they've also parsed it out in different constant contact communications. Kahina Haynes, the executive director, made a video that she circulated. So I think they've done a really fabulous job of just looping back to people, and it's actually woven in with a fundraising appeal. So I think next we're going to go to questions.
So can you all hear me? Thank you both so much. That was absolutely excellent. Thank you, Tasharna. Thank you, Kristen. I see there are some questions that have come up in the chat box, one or two questions. I'm not sure if it's targeted towards this particular presentation, but we were just talking about, is there any advice on how to handle when a board member is so busy with their own job that they can't help you with anything until later, a few months later? How would that be handled?
Well, I can address that one. I think that's why it's really important to work on the structure of your board. If you are having trouble meeting quorum, and you don't have an executive committee, you need to formally create an executive committee so that there's a smaller group of people. You need a smaller group of people that, smaller number of votes to move things forward. Or I think also you just have to be a little bit flexible and ask, is there anything they can do, even if it's something very small? And anyone else have thoughts about that?
I would say I can speak on YI's perspective, because we really went from our board meeting very seldomly to meeting 10 times a week, it feels like now. But it was a struggle to transition. So we do have some board members who are very engaged, and as you said, we do have some who we expect a little bit more, would like a little bit more from. For me, it's been about flexibility. So sometimes I have to, meet at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, or do phone calls at random times. And then also, back to Kristen's point, is having the people who are very engaged, giving them responsibility. So having an executive committee has been tremendous in the couple of weeks that we've had an executive committee. And that's because I can call the board chair or call one or two people and say, hey, here's what's going on. Can you help me? And I feel kind of bad asking for all of this support at this particular time, because everybody's lives are crazy. But our board has been kind of, those people, when you ask, they've been showing up. So I think the first step is to make the ask and then be flexible about when you can work with those people. Like, I know I've had to have a call like at midnight because that's when my board member was available because there's so much going on. But as long as we're being flexible, I think that it's and we're asking. I think that's one of the larger problems is like making the ask
Making the ask, yes.
and them understanding it.
Very good. Thank you both so very much. I know that there are some different questions and responses coming up in the chat box. And I want to thank you again as we move forward in the interest of time. Next slide, please. We're happy to, because there's a variety of different questions and comments that are coming through the chat box. And so it helps us to move very well and seamlessly into the next portion of the session. I'm happy, again, as I mentioned at Fair Chance, there's a dynamic team that works together to support nonprofits. And as part of our time today, we promised to spend some time talking about HR tools, strategies, and resources. And so at this time, I'm happy to introduce Lauren Bell, who is the Senior Operations Advisor at Fair Chance. Lauren?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I am not going to turn on my camera to leave you guys with the better image of this picture for me rather than what I actually look like. So yeah, thank you guys for being here. And yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about the HR considerations and tools, but it sounds like you guys are already employing a lot. So you know, please excuse me if I'm repeating what's already been said. The next slide. So, you know, as you mentioned before, the things that we need to consider are work logistics, and these are things that affect your human resources. So work logistics, video meetings, conference calls like we're doing now, is working from home accessible to all employees? For a certain subset of employees, it's not. And what equipment is needed? I've noticed that I have been burning out all of my work printer paper with schoolwork, so that's a consideration. Changes in schedules. Again, a lot of employees might be homeschooling and acting as caregivers to not only their children, but parents and immunocompromised adults as well. And so these are considerations that you have to take into account. For folks' schedules and their changes in workload, will they be able to do the same 9 to 5, or will they have to shift their hours, reduce their hours, all of that? And differences in communication, that's a big one. Miscommunication over the different media is a much higher risk. We all know that, you know, emails and Slack messages often carry a different tone than having an in-person conversation. And how do people prefer to communicate? Do they prefer to see you face-to-face? Is phone sufficient? Or do they like to communicate via Slack, which is definitely Slack or a messaging service like that, which is less formal? And ensuring that you have a consistent check-in with your employees, because it's easy to just like head down in the work and, you know, just getting in the work and assuming that your employees or you know, your teams are fine, and sometimes people need to check in. So these are just some considerations that you need to take into account with this new work world that we're living in. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So timing considerations for HR as well. Basically, we have to consider the timing of this. This happened. Right now we're in spring, as we can all, and most of us can see, you know, it's beautiful outside. But spring is typically the time for performance management adjustments and salary changes. And it can be a big time for hiring and termination. So is this the right time to do performance management and performance reviews? So is remote performance management a thing? And is that something doable for your organization? Can you communicate the nuances of some of these things? Because often there are nuances that come along with these discussions. The empathy and the nuances that need to happen, can those be communicated over a video call? That's something to consider. And hiring and terminations. you need to consider the change in workload. You guys talked about the change in income prior, but that's going to also affect the change in workload. It might increase based on what your nonprofit does, or it may decrease depending on kind of what's happening. So are hiring changes needed in the next few months, and can you onboard effectively remotely? And you may not have a choice. So you may have to get together with the team that does onboarding and figure out some new ways to do onboarding. And I know that some organizations try to roll out new processes and technology. Is this the time? And that means maybe yes, because you may be introducing new remote working technologies. You may have to, but if you're rolling out new systems and processes, is this the time for that change on top of the remote working change and kind of the change of work that everybody's experiencing? Because people can only handle so much change. So, we have to consider the amount of change and kind of what people are going through all of this. Next slide. All right. So employee transitions. Things are changing every day, as you guys know. I know that I'm checking the news, multiple times a day. It is hard to plan. So what do? Honestly, I heard this prior to my section, but communication, that is essential. Communicating with employees and teams and your partners about, communicate early and often. So try to get ahead of things that might affect your organization, and try to just be very clear with your communication. That people always appreciate that. Be clear and honest. Again, with honesty is of high regard. We all know this. So be clear and honest with your communication. Communicate what is happening and the associated impacts with the organization. A lot of people are wondering what's going to happen with the organization. Are we going to close? Are we going to furlough? What's happening? So just maintain that communication about what's happening with them as well as the organization and how things are evolving. And if a reduction of force is necessary, plan and ensure that this is done in an organized manner. And again, communicate with not only the folks impacted, but folks in the team, the whole organization, that these kinds of things are happening and what it means for them individually and their teams. Next slide, please. So, if needed, here are a few options for force reduction. And there are some nuances here that in some of the benefits vary state by state, but this is kind of a broad swath that we wanted to make sure to cover. So everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with a layoff. It's termination of employment, and a layoff can be temporary or permanent. You can do a layoff for, you could talk about a layoff for 6 months, or you could say, you're being laid off. There's no set return date. Benefits can continue if they are needed. You can offer benefits to a laid off employee. They can apply for unemployment, and they qualify for COBRA if needed. Now, a furlough is different. This termination is temporary, usually no longer than 60 days, and there is a return date set. The benefits can be continued and typically are, but it's up to your organization. And employees can apply for unemployment during the furlough period. A reduction of force is a permanent termination of employees, usually in a group. So you can get rid of a whole part of the organization or just one person. Rehire is not expected, and employees qualify for COBRA and unemployment. The next slide. So, but, I just mentioned qualifying for unemployment, but unemployment in the age of COVID. As you guys have heard on the news, a lot of people are applying, so processing times are longer, lines are longer, it's just everything is backed up. Currently, the work search requirements are waived in many jurisdictions, but I would check with your home jurisdiction to see if that's the case. Additional benefits do vary state to state. In Maryland, there is a weekly bonus. And Virginia and DC are different, so I would check, but there are some additional benefits in unemployment. Currently, employees will receive the same benefits regardless of their employer's unemployment funding election. So employees can apply for unemployment regardless of what their employer has done. And eligible employees eligible for unemployment, will receive their full benefits regardless of their employer's ability to pay the unemployment taxes. So encourage, if you do have to do a reduction in force, encourage your employees to file for unemployment because even though it's long and it's hard and it takes a while, they will get the benefit regardless of what the organization has done. Next slide. So shared work. This is another option for if you have a reduction of workload and a reduction in the amount of money that you can pay your staff, you can do a shared work plan. This allows an employer to temporarily reduce the work hours of a group of employees. And so basically, multiple employees, 2 or more, can share the work of one employee. And they receive a percentage of their unemployment benefits and they receive a percentage of their salary. Next slide. So the DC guidelines. So you submit the shared work plan. You have to come up with a shared work plan. And like I said, it involves more than one employee, and the employees all have to agree to this plan. So basically, it's like multiple employees going part-time to equal one full-time employee. These work plans have to be submitted to the Department of Employment Services, and your application should certify that you've provided a list. All employees affected are full-time regular employees that are transitioning to part-time. It applies to a minimum of 10% of employees, and no less than 2 employees are affected. So again, you have to share, so it has to be 2 employees. And for the affected are at least 20 and no more than 40% of the employees' work hours. So a percentage reduction will apply for the entire length. So you can cut them down and you can scale them back up, and then you can qualify. Again, there's some nuances. Check the DC Department of Employment Services for the specifics on this, but it is an option rather than laying folks off. But folks have to be willing, it has to be a group that is willing to do this. It can't just be one person agreeing and the other person not agreeing. Next slide. And this is more guidelines continued. You have to certify that there will be equal treatment of the affected unit. And usually this tends to be evaluated on a week-by-week basis. So it does take actually a lot of management for this to be effective and to be certified. And they will not be used to reduce the fringe benefits. So the benefits remain the same. But the benefits remain the same, but the working hours will be reduced. The shared work plan will be used in lieu of a temporary layoff. So again, this is in lieu of furlough, and it will not be used to subsidize seasonal employees during the off season. So you can't hire, a whole bunch of seasonal workers and then do shared work plans for the off season. This has to be, this is a temporary thing, and it has to be shown that this is a temporary thing it's used to solve a problem, not an organizational problem. Next slide. So yeah, any questions?
What we're going to do is we're going to ask the questions be typed into the chat box at this time if you have them. And we are going to get a chance to move ahead. As you introduce your next counterpart, we can also have him at the end. We'll take the questions that come up.
Great. So now I'm happy to,
mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm happy to introduce Ben Bradburn. He is the Director of Institutional Philanthropy here in Fairchance and a wonderful resource on giving and revenue streams for nonprofits. He has been a wonderful resource and been at Fairchance for a while, so has a lot of institutional knowledge, and very happy to have him speak on this.
Thanks, Lauren. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share a few slides and pieces of information to put the CARES Act into context and some funding resources for you all. I want to say that this is much of which you all are well versed in and well know, but just wanted to put it in one place so that you can have it and we can move through it. So in the next few minutes, I'd like to sort of go through a few slides about what we're hearing from funders, and I hope as I'm speaking that you all will chime in to either contradict or actually share some other things you're hearing as well from funders, and type in your questions as well. We'll also go into what is the CARES Act and how nonprofits can take advantage of it, and also a quick resource page there. So next slide, please. So response from funders. So, what are we hearing from the funding community here? First of all, I want to thank everybody who filled out the survey last week that was shared with the Washington Regional Association of Grant Makers working group for children, youth, and families. They are greatly appreciated that as they were trying to formulate their own sort of response as funders and helping to share resources. So having those stories, whether anonymous or otherwise, were really, really helpful. So thank you for participating in that. Once we have some feedback from that, we will be sure to share it. But I think in terms of what funders are really thinking about these days are their grantees. They're checking in with them to see how they are affected. It goes both ways, of course. Some funders have over 300 locally, so it's hard to check in with each one. So I think the advice of picking up the phone and calling them is absolutely appropriate in these unprecedented times. Funders are also checking in with each other too, through the RAG and through other means, informally and formally. So in response, I think what I'm hearing is that a number of funders are converting project and program funding to general ops. Some are actually moving up payments and distribution schedules so that they can get into the hands of their grantees a little bit quicker. And then a number of are creating emergency funds like Verizon, the Great Community Foundation, and United Way. Next slide, please. So what is the CARES Act? Well, the acronym actually stands for the Coronavirus Relief and Economic Security Act. And this is actually the third act, or the third phase of relief funds that have been injected into the economy. The act itself is 800 pages and 2.2 trillion, and it's for states and hospitals. It's for individuals and businesses and nonprofits. But this comes after sort of the first phase of the relief funds that have come out, and that was an 8.3 billion aid package that was for vaccine research and development that happened on March the 3rd. And then in mid-March, there was what was called the Families First Act, and that was 104 billion. And that sort of worked on sort of more of the individual level, sort of working on paid leave and that. But the CARES Act in general is really, really focusing on sort of what can we do for nonprofits and businesses to inject as much capital into the economy as possible, freeing up funds so that it can stabilize the economy and institutions. So what is, next slide, please. First of all, just quickly here for donors, I guess one of the ways in which it's not so much injecting, but it's freeing up funds for nonprofits is that it actually makes a universal charitable deduction possible, so that everyone can deduct up to $300. So which extends this sort of giving to people who give smaller amounts, not just for the ones that give large amounts. That was originally introduced with the tax relief bill last year. It also lifts an existing cap on annual contributions for corporations from, so individual contributions from itemizers from 60% to 100%, and increases corporation contributions, what they can deduct from 10% up to 25% of their taxable income. Next slide, please. So here is, most everything that is in the coronavirus funding or the CARES Act that has implications for nonprofits. I'm going to just briefly touch on each one of these, except for the Paycheck Protection Program, which is, which I'll go into more detail, but they sort of have, each one has its own benefits, and if you take advantage of one or the other, you may not be able to participate in the Paycheck Protection Program. But first, the first is a delay in payroll tax remittance. And what's that? That is, well, that really is when, as employers, after payroll, there are payments made for Social Security to the government by not only employers, but by employees. And this actually delays that payment or defers that payment for those Social Security payroll taxes. And that is a delayed payment between now and the 1st of next year. And what that does, it's a deferral, it's not forgiveness, but it's actually, it can inject needed revenue or needed funds to save funds that can be used in other ways. And that can be, that can be paid out back over the next 2 years. 50% is due at the end of next year, and 50% due is at the end of 2022. But this does not apply to employers who have loans forgiven under the Paycheck Protection Program. Again, on the Paycheck, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I want to also go into another loan program offered by the Small Business Administration, or the SBA, and it's the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. And that is really, really working on loans that are given at during hurricanes and tornadoes and the like. And that basically is open to small businesses and nonprofits, including faith-based nonprofits with fewer than 500 employees. And so this gives up to $2 million in working capital with for a loan up to 30-year term with a 2.75 percentage rate for nonprofits, and payments may be deferred up to a year. One thing is that this interacts with the Paycheck Protection Program, and you may not be able to participate. This does, because you can include that in. There's also a component in that for $10,000 emergency grant within 3 days that does not have to be repaid. So that is actually can be work in conjunction with the Paycheck Protection Program. There's also see one other sort of the employee retention credit. That's another part of it. But first of all, a little disclaimer here: we're all trying to figure this out as we go. So would love, but that's why it's so important to have meetings like this and groups so we can learn from each other as we go along. So in terms of the paycheck, the last one is the paid sick and FMLA. That was actually part of the Families First Act that actually offers, from the phase 2 of the bill, that offers employers with less than 500 employees 10 days of paid sick leave. And this is possible for that. So, and then an FMLA as well, that is also involved with that. I can share some great slides that are from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that has a great video that's also in the resource section that can that goes into more details on these programs outside of the Paycheck Protection Program. So I'd like to jump into the next slide, which is the program itself. So the Paycheck Protection Program is $349 billion of forgivable loans to small businesses and nonprofits that are, so that they could pay their employees, pay for rent and other critical business expenses during this time. The application opened on April the 3rd for nonprofits. That doesn't mean that the banks and these were open, and these applications are made through SBA lenders, and now I understand through all lenders that have an FDIC, not just SBA lenders, but I'm understanding now that is open to all FDIC lenders. And that doesn't mean that each lender is ready to receive your application. It has had a sort of staggered start, and my sense of hearing from bankers and others is that they're trying to figure out this as much as we are. So as applications are coming in. So it is important, and many of you have sort of started the process already, collecting the necessary information for this and for the application, and which is and actually starting on April the 10th, independent contractors and self-employed individuals can also apply for that. And you have to make the application by June the 30th. If you can advance the slide, please. So who can apply? All businesses and nonprofits with less than 500 employees can apply. What do I need to apply? You will need, you need to submit some documentation with the application. It's a fairly straightforward application itself, but the required documentation also requires a number of sort of research in terms of pulling payroll records as well as accounting reports that are needed for that. So how large can the loan be? Well, the limit is 10 million for these expenses, but loans can be for really up to 2 months of your monthly average payroll, and that is multiplied by 2.5%, and that is the full loan amount. So, and that is based on sort of your average monthly payroll for including healthcare that is allowed under the program. So that is if you can advance the last slide here for the PPP. So the loan can be forgiven if you spend the money on payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities over the 8-week period for the loan. And does the PPP cover sick leave? It does cover, and it includes other benefits and the like. However, it does exclude sick and family leave wages that qualify for credit under the Families First, the Phase 2 program. So this is part of the many of groups are applying for Paycheck Protection Program. I've heard that that K-Fritz Foundation is in encouraging all their grantees to apply, and it is really a way to really provide meaningful sort of and substantive funding to stabilize operations. Next slide, please. And so here are some pooled funding opportunities and some resource pages for you. We found that the RAG COVID response page, which many of you have found already, as well as has been a great resource to many people. The Greater Washington Community Foundation has received a lot of interest in their response fund, so much so that there was the word put out that they have to limit it, and they actually have, instead of shutting it down, they've extended the deadline, or actually have a deadline to apply by this coming Monday. The second is the United Way has a relief fund, and then there are two other resources. I think that the FMA, Fiscal Strength for Nonprofits, that we recently sent out on the eForum listserv, that there's a link there to that presentation. I think that's one of the best I've seen. And then in terms of navigating the entire sort of the other programs, including the PPP, there's a great video from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and they have a slide presentation that goes along with that. It's about 30 minutes long, and I really recommend it. So again, this is we are in unprecedented times, but this calls for great creativity and strength, and for us sticking together, and that's why I'm so happy to be able to present to you guys today, and that we can learn from each other through the Fair Chance Network.
Much, Ben. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is the time for questions. I do see one here in the chat box, and I believe it's referring to the what you were just discussing. It says, since it is in quotes payroll, does it exclude 1099 contractors?
My understanding is that if they're pretty much like an annual contractor through the entire year, and they are sort of almost treated as if it were an employee, then they would qualify, but and they would be included. But
okay. And I don't know.
Actually, can I just add on?
Please.
That's actually something to consider, because if you include 1099s as part of your payroll for this, then there may be Department of Labor implications as to like why this contractor is basically doing employee functions. So just it's something to be careful around.
thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren. There was another question that came up in the chat box, and this was directly after Lauren's presentation, and it said, how do HR professionals do self-care given the responsibility to care for so many others? That was after the Lauren's HR piece. Lauren?
Sure. So just like anybody, you have to make sure to look after yourself. You're giving a lot as an HR administrator and HR personnel, you're giving a lot to the employees, making sure that not only the employees are running smoothly, but the teams are running smoothly, that people, you know, are able to work and live in the best way possible. You're giving a lot. So just make sure to take time, take breaks, turn off your email notifications, and have somebody to talk to. If that's friends, family members, other folks at work, have somebody to talk to. Personally, like, you know, I used my family just kind of as an emotional, just like, I just get it all out with my family. And that's very helpful for me, but, you know, use what works for you. But those are, you know, just taking time for yourself, getting it out. You don't want to keep it in. Those are a few things, and turning off notifications are just a few tips. But if you guys have others, we welcome them.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. I see that there's some conversation going, and that's the beauty of this in the chat box regarding the 1099s. And so it looks like there are some, Ms. Gutierrez, as well as Angeli from Fair Chance, were saying that 1099s are supposed to apply on their own starting tomorrow. I believe that was also mentioned in the presentation. And so we would like to honor everyone's time. And again, thank you so very much for coming to share this time with us today. We are going to hear back from Gretchen Vanderveer with closing remarks so that we can get a gauge about how Fair Chance can support you and your organization through this time. And she will come now. Thanks, Gretchen. Next slide. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thanks to everybody. Just incredible. Yasmin, Lamont, Tasharna, and all of the Fair Chance team members. Thank you so much for making yourselves available and for sharing some wisdom, some experiences, and some thoughts with us this morning. I hope you all find them valuable. And of course, we want to hear from you all about the value of this particular webinar. But what we're really going to do right now is ask for you to use your chat box and to just share with us any thoughts that you have on how Fair Chance can continue to support you and your organization as we continue through this season of social distancing, staying at home, whatever we want to call this. As you all are doing contingency planning, Fair Chance is doing contingency planning. And as a part of that, our board is looking at our priorities in our 2019 through 2021 strategic plan. And one of our priorities was building an alumni network services program. And we believe that that priority will continue, particularly now and given what we're all experiencing. So we are trying to figure out what that means. And your input right now would be incredibly helpful for us. So I'm beginning to see that some people are typing, but it seems to be all about the 1099s. If anybody has any thoughts for Fair Chance on future webinars, ways in which we could come together on a more regular basis, I'm not going to put ideas in your head, but if you have some thoughts, we would really appreciate that at this time for the next few minutes before we close down at the appointed time of noon. I'm seeing make short info videos accessible in the event team members miss webinars. Great suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? It sounds like we still have just a lot of questions coming in. So we can take your just general questions too. I see a comment about executive directors could use some one-on-one coaching on contingency plans. Somebody's looking for some creative engagement warm activities for Zoom for youth. Yes, I think sharing how we are building community via a remote and virtual chat rooms and Zoom calls would be really helpful. And then there was a question earlier about, does anybody have any good information about when we will be back to normal? Again, for our scenario planning that was so beautifully modeled by Tasharna. And Kristen has a response with a CNN video from Dr. Fauci about school starting in the fall, but it may not look quite the same. So social distancing may be with us here for a while. I see a great idea about getting together and having a guided discussion on how things are going. More on virtual conversations on the do's and don'ts around the PPP and applying. Is everyone aware that there's going to be, the Giving Tuesday folks, which is a national nonprofit that promotes Giving Tuesday in the fall, are going to be promoting a national day of giving on May the 5th for nonprofits to take advantage of, and trying to reach out to donors about their specific needs during coronavirus. That's another resource that is happening. So I would look up Giving Tuesday. I think the Chronicle of Philanthropy is putting out information on that because they are Giving Tuesday's DC partner. So if you're interested in developing a donor campaign, think about May 5th as a launch point for that. Okay, a lot of just wanting to share about how to do virtual meetings well. We're all learning that as we go. And I think some of us have already made some mistakes and learned some lessons, and we'd be willing to share. So maybe our next webinar could be around that topic. We've also had people offer to talk with our network about cybersecurity, which is becoming a greater issue as everybody's moving online. So are cyber criminals. So we need to protect the nonprofit sector from that. I've also had some folks reach out to me about having a conversation about how COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting communities of color and communities of poverty, and how we might come together around that to do some communication about that. Any other ideas of how Fair Chance could be helpful? So let me just ask a question then. Was this webinar of value? Answer that yes or no in the chat box, and then just if you have an idea for an additional webinar, please put that in the chat box as well. Okay, it looks like people are saying this was valuable, but you need some more time to think about ideas. It sounds like more conversation about just available funding sources. So maybe we just need to have another webinar focused on that and other free resources. So let's just schedule another webinar, and we're going to do that. Can't say when. Is this a good time for folks? Can folks let us know whether or not in the chat box if there's a better time, recommend that. But usually we hold executive director learning communities between 10 and noon on a morning during the work week. Those are typically when we do it. We start your morning off before you get too tied up in something else. Okay, I'm seeing someone say this was a great time. Okay. Good time, okay. I'm seeing another resource, One Common Unity, a Fair Chance partner, is providing free parenting and other classes. That's another great resource for everybody to know. Okay, and I see some love for Tasharna. Okay, great. Okay, a lot of affirmation that this is a good time. Wonderful. So we will plan a follow-up webinar. We will announce it in the next week or so, and it won't be too far out in the future. It'll be sooner rather than later, but it will be between 10 and noon. and we will take this input and get back to you with what that will be. Just want to ask if you have any more love that you want to share for anybody who was on this webinar this morning. I want to personally give a shout out to everyone once again, and thank Jennifer for being a terrific MC and facilitator and host. We are at 11:59. Jennifer, I'm going to kick it to you for the final last word.
Very good. Thank you so much, Gretchen, and thanks to all of you. If we can have the next slide, we just want you to stay tuned as Gretchen just wrapped it up for us. We're going to ask that you complete the survey that we're going to send you in the next 24 hours. If you could please just let us know your insight. As you all know, you do this work. That feedback is critical to the work that we do and really helps guide and direct our roadmap for helping to serve you better. So once again, on behalf of the entire Fair Chance team, we'd like to thank you so very much for sharing your time with us this morning. And please, let's stay connected and let's be a support for one another during this time. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank
Good
you,
day.